lasciò a condizioni amiga sencilla.
All right. We are here.
Hey, Clay.
Hey. There he is.
Do you hear me?
All right. Sorry we're a little late, folks. First AMA, a little bit of technical difficulty. You can hear me, yeah? I think Alex is having some technical. So Alex has just landed in London from New York. He is a Rolling Stone. And we're getting set up here. I don't think he can hear me. You hear me now?
Now I can.
Well, I'm also broadcasting in the Zoom, so you might be getting an echo. All right. All right. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. I guess I don't know how many people are watching, but very happy to have you all here. Thanks for coming.
I second that. I'm super grateful to be here, excited to talk with Clay and to be able to talk directly to our community also.
Yeah, so I'm going to kill this game because I'm getting some feedback. So Alex, why don't you kick us off? Why don't you, well, I'll introduce everybody here. So Alex is our head of partnerships. He's been with us about 5 months now officially, but he joined the project actually when we started bootstrapping close to 3 years ago. He was one of the first people that we talked to when we sort of took it out of the garage. We met in Beijing, and he's been in close connection with us since the beginning. And we probably should have had him join earlier. Actually, it's been a big addition to the team to get him on board. He's been in crypto since how long have you been in crypto, Alex?
2019 full time, so 5 years just building, and 2017 started to dabble in trading, and I guess that's how most people get involved initially.
Yeah. So Alex has just come from South America and then New York. Now he's in London, and I think next stop is Singapore, or is there a stop in between?
Yeah, I got
So
one
he's going to
stop. I
be
went
joining
to
us.
an engagement party of my sister's in Turkey, so we'll stop over before Singapore. But Singapore is the next big crypto event that we're going to be at in person. So if anyone from our community is going to be there and wants to reach out to us, I encourage you to do that. We're super excited, both because we get to meet everybody in Singapore and also because our team structure is quite decentralized. So it's not all the time that we're in the same place at the same time. And when we are, it's always a good time too. So super excited about that one.
Yeah. So Alex, sorry about the audio. Alex is, like I said, he's just coming in from the airport. Actually, he just landed like 40 minutes ago in London. So he has to shoot from a cafe or something, but we'll try to get the audio fixed up a bit better next time. Yeah, myself, I'm Clayton Rabenda. I'm the founder of Lithium. I've been doing software for about 20 years, previously at Google, and building in the space since around 2017. It's actually my third project. And yeah, maybe we can start by telling people a little bit about maybe the story of Lithium, how it got started, and what we're doing. Maybe and a little bit about the vision, I think. Um,
I agree,
so,
and I
like I
would
said,
add some.
this is
I, I would add some context as to the bigger macro picture in terms of why we decided to do it also. So what it is and
right.
also why, and that fits into kind of where we are now in the crypto space, the evolution, the history, and where we're going also, where we see the future of the internet and the blockchain industry. So lots to
Yeah,
talk about.
yeah. So there's a couple different ways to tell the story. I mean, there's my personal story and how I sort of half discovered, half created what we call proof of performance. But maybe the bigger narrative is more interesting to people, which is sort of why getting more into more like how we see the ecosystem, the blockchain ecosystem, and what we see Lithium's part in the whole story, in the past and going forward. Like I said, I've been in the industry since, well, I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013, read the white paper 2011. And I think what happened in 2017 was, I think a lot of people in the industry don't really, um, maybe didn't experience it firsthand, but there's a very interesting thing that happened there when the blocks became full in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash split, and the word cash sort of became a bad word. And I think everybody sort of chose their path there in that split, either favoring the decentralization or the scale, but that in a sense both sides lost. I think, and that's sort of my view these days. In that Bitcoin prior to 2017. We used to say that Cash was the killer app in the Bitcoin community, and also, the community was super aligned. It was Bitcoin versus the world, and Bitcoin had 99% of the market cap. And we used to think that whatever other chains discovered, like Ethereum or Monero or whoever, Bitcoin would be able to incorporate those changes and just fork and keep going forward. And I think we sort of learned the hard way that these things are a little more rigid than we thought. And also, the BTC side, while I think it's legit to claim that they're sort of the most decentralized and the most secure chain for a couple reasons, they also sort of gave up on a lot of the vision, right? Because before that, we were actually using Bitcoin on chain for payments. Like, you could actually buy games on Xbox from Microsoft with Bitcoin on chain. You could buy flights, you could get hotels. There was a lot of international payments, remittances were happening. And all that sort of just died when cash became a bad word and Bitcoin became digital gold, and Bitcoin Cash went its way, and then BSV and all this nonsense happened. And I was very sympathetic to both sides actually at the time, but yeah, I think there's legitimate reasons to say also that it's dangerous to scale, or at least it's dangerous to scale blockchains that came before Lithium, and we can maybe get into like why we think that. Um, what do you see? So Alex, Alex has been going around the world telling everybody about Lithium recently, and I guess people would always like to know, like, what is it that interested you about Litheum, and why did you decide to join the team?
Multiple reasons. I think the problem that you alluded to is arguably the biggest bottleneck in the industry, which is this, and the ethos of the industry fundamentally for me is decentralized tech that scales. The premise that I joined the industry on, and Bitcoin offers decentralization, and what you're referring to in 2017 is basically the first scaling problem, like, and how it was dealt with. So when we arrived in 2017 and the blocks were full, that was basically the moment for Bitcoin in which a direction was chosen in terms of how to scale. And since then, we've had a lot of other solutions, but really the combination of decentralization and scale is something that I think has immense value, and that's what we're trying to build over here. We've seen lots of different attempts, lots of different methodologies, but building from first principles, I think is the way to go, and that's the approach that we're taking.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people, and maybe, this can be sort of one of the first questions that's more about Litheum and less about us. A lot of people, I think when they see maybe the word big chain, or they hear that we're, just letting the blocks scale dynamically, they assume that we've compromised in some way, and that maybe we don't understand decentralization. And I think it's very important to just restate that we believe that Litheum doesn't compromise on decentralization, right? We do view it as a fundamental solution to the trilemma, and that it is possible to achieve the scale and deliver, decentralized tech to the whole world, so that everyone in the world can use it multiple times per day. And on top of that, it can be as secure or more secure than like the top tier blockchains. And we can get into like how we think that's possible. I think one of my favorite things to say or to mention when we're sort of getting into like these fundamental questions is to remind everyone that the bottleneck for blockchains is different than the bottleneck in traditional systems, and that we intentionally limit blockchains. Bottlenecks in traditional systems are not something we intentionally put there typically, right? Unless you're trying to charge somebody for access to the faster one. But typically you're running into like the CPU is bottlenecked, or the memory is bottlenecked, or the bandwidth is bottlenecked. And then you have to either scale vertically or scale horizontally in order to get through the bottleneck. But blockchains are very different. We intentionally say, no, the blockchains can only be 20 million or 30 million gas, or the blocks can only be 1 megabyte. And nobody really, I think, has discussed in very clear, like explain like I'm five sort of detail why that is. And if you can first answer that question, why do we intentionally limit blockchains, then you can start to think about maybe how we can get past that problem. But I think a big reason, another sort of related thing that I think about is like the fact that there's a lot of mudslinging in the space, and that there's some people who believe that Solana can scale safely, and there's some people who think that it can't. And there's a lot of like name calling and sort of like just infighting is proof that nobody's really gotten to the bottom of the problem, right? Because if somebody had the answer and we could just prove it to everybody, then there would be no fighting, right? It would just be, those people are like flat earthers, right? And that would sort of be the end of the debate, and nobody else would really care that they're going around saying something. But because nobody's gotten to the bottom of like, why exactly do we have this trilemma thing, or the scale versus decentralization thing, I think there's not a lot of clarity on whether you can or cannot scale safely. And like, Solana has been running for years without a problem. So, what really is the problem? I think that's a valid point of view, right? I mean, if something is working, then it's working, right?
It's working. It's working in the sense that it's also been more recently adopted by a significant portion of the wider crypto community, and there's a lot of usage on it. And I have a follow-up question to what you were just talking about, which is what kind of proof? You said that this debate or this ongoing name throwing is suggestive of no one getting to the bottom of it and having some kind of proof or if it's possible to scale in a safe way? What kind of proof are you hoping that we may be able to put out there, or what kind of proof would be satisfactory? How can we know at some point that we've gotten to this point that you're referring to?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two forms of proof, right? There's sort of the theoretical sort of proof where you can set about with some assumptions and axioms, and then you can just deduce from there whether something is or isn't true. And then there's like empirical proof, which is to say, like, well, Bitcoin's been running since 2011 or earlier. It was I don't know when it launched exactly, 2009. So it's been running a decade and a half, and nobody's hacked it and hasn't broken, right? So I think that's actually, like, strictly speaking, formally a less strong proof, but practically speaking, it's sort of a stronger proof, right? Because uh, you know, theoretical proofs do rely on assumptions, right? We can discuss more easily, obviously, sort of theoretical reasons why Lithium is able to scale safely, but frankly, it won't be until we have a test net, and better yet, a main net, that, like, you can really have any sort of empirical proof, because these things rely on incentives, and you can't build incentives until you have a token which actually has a real world value. So that's a little bit tricky, but nevertheless, these things do work, right? Like, Bitcoin once upon a time had no value, but it was still secure, right? In a sense, right? Because you still needed to, like, do the work in order to make the thing work, and people were able to see the future vision of it, right? So I don't think that's necessarily it's not like you have to cross some impossible barrier to get from theoretical to practical, right?
Yeah.
Thousands of blockchains have done it, I suppose.
Yeah, I have some thoughts and questions on that topic. I want to bring in questions that we're getting from our audience.
Yeah, it looks like we got our first question. Let's go over here.
We've got two. One of them is that in Discord last week you mentioned some information about the nodes, and someone's asking what type of specifications do the Lithium nodes want to require, and will there be a GUI or CLI type of node?
Yeah, so as far as specifications, so one thing that's really interesting about Lithium is that we unify scale and difficulty, right? So in a sense, the difficulty becomes the thing that people want the blockchain to do, which is generally processing transactions. It's giving data to the wallets, getting the data from the wallets, getting the transactions from the wallets, moving the transactions around the network, getting them into blocks and propagating the blocks. All that stuff is the work of proof of performance, right? You're performing those tasks on behalf of the end users. So the scale and the difficulty are unified. And when you ask, like, what is the specification for running a node, it's a bit like asking, how much hash do you have to have in order to mine Bitcoin, right? You can participate in producing work for the chain with different levels of hardware. What was that? Are you doing a little dance there, Alex? What was that?
I was drawing a chart over time.
Okay.
I guess in Bitcoin's case, it's been going up pretty steadily, even maybe exponentially.
Yeah.
Or more linearly. I'd say more linearly, but despite the halving also, which is we won't get too much into that today. But yeah, that's an interesting.
Yeah.
We talk sometimes about the halving being a halving of the security budget of Bitcoin. But yeah,
right.
Nodes of Lithium. Coming back to the question.
Yeah, well, if we're going to go down the whole, like, what makes a blockchain secure rabbit hole, that's sort of that's a pretty deep one. We can definitely go there, but this question is more, I think, just getting to the nitty gritty of, like, I want to run a node. How much hardware do I need? And so in that vein, I don't want to make people think, like, oh, you're going to need to have, like, some giant server in order to participate in Lithium. One really interesting thing is that people were demonstrating gigabyte blocks on Bitcoin in, like, 2015, 2016, which is 1,000 on a laptop. So that's like 1,000 times more performant than Bitcoin was. And so we think that we can get quite a lot of performance out of, like, commodity hardware and commodity internet connections, right? At least when you compare to other blockchains. So it should be you should be able to participate in proof of performance with pretty modest hardware for quite a while. It is true that in the long run, though, you will need like considerable hardware in order to fully synchronize and stay participating, right? And that's something that a lot of people question when they first hear it, because there's this meme in the industry that you need to be able to run on a commodity hardware in order to be decentralized. And that actually stems, I think, from the whole trilemma concept. So if you go back and you find the blog post that Vitalik wrote where he introduced this concept of the trilemma, it was actually within the context of introducing the idea of sharding in order to scale Ethereum. And what he said was that decentralization is typically interpreted, he used those words specifically, typically interpreted to mean that you don't have to trust any network that can't be joined with a consumer laptop. And he was very careful, I think, to state it that way because he couldn't prove that that was the case, right? And I think also, like, practically, people know that you don't really need to be able to do that, right? Most people trust Ethereum and trust Bitcoin without running full nodes, right? And I know there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin community who think you do have to run a full node, but I strongly disagree with that. I think it's pretty easy to show that you don't have to. This is the whole point of having the hash work, is like you can just look at the difficulty of the hash and know that there's a considerable amount of work behind that block header, and you don't need the whole block in order to prove that that's like going to be the longest amount of work in that chain. And I think you can apply the same reasoning to all the proof of stake chains. It's just that the work is of a certain different quality. But yeah, there's, I think it's important to sort of just meet that question head on, right? Like, is it a problem that in the long run with a dynamic block size and an unbound block size, ultimately, does that compromise the decentralization because people won't be able to synchronize full blocks on their computer at home, right? And we strongly disagree with that. We think in order to preserve the qualities of decentralization that people want, like the uncensorability and the privacy and the robustness and things like that, it's fine to have like 10 to 100,000 nodes that are just running in around the world, as long as they're spread out. Many people are running them. They're not located all in the same location. You still get all those properties that you want. But if you disagree with that, then I guess Lithium isn't for you. But yeah, I think that in the end, the proof is in the pudding. And as far as the name Lithium, the reason for that is because we ultimately think that the Lithium can be one of the most efficient chains, because we use the functions of the blockchain that people want the blockchain to do, processing of transactions, as the work itself. We sort of don't have anything that we would consider to be wasteful work. Every blockchain, in order to produce a consensus, needs a difficulty. And so because our difficulty is all stuff that's useful, it's sort of like doing like the minimal stuff in order to produce a secure blockchain. And so in some sense, it's the greenest. And so we were thinking about lithium ion batteries with that naming. And then obviously the EUM is sort of, because we are EVM compatible and we want to have that, like, Ethereum mojo, I guess, behind us, we put the E in there.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for the people asking the question also.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Verify is one of my favorite Lithium community members for the memes that he posts in our Telegram.
Oh yeah.
All right. And thank you, our media, for your question. Also, if you guys have follow-on questions to the answers given, please go ahead. Otherwise, we touched on a bunch of things. So with regards to the specifications of the Lithium nodes, we mentioned that it changes over time. So one way to think about that, as someone who wants to get involved in the project on that side, is that you'll have the greatest percentage for a given amount of hardware deployed. So you'll have the highest percentage of the network early on, similarly to if you're mining Bitcoin. So we're expecting, from my side, a big opportunity early on in that regard. So
right.
To get involved very keen to get people like yourself on media.
Yeah.
That's something good.
Also, just think about well, we can get into some of the numbers. I think one of the other things before we jump off of that subject a little bit is to remind also everyone that you will be able to participate in consensus without synchronizing full blocks. You can provide services as both probably a transaction runner and a data runner without synchronizing full blocks, maybe even as a block runner. And so, yeah, there's going to be opportunities, I think, to participate without running a full node. We're also assuming that there's going to be, sort of pooling services that will be able to run, so you can have like a portion of a node or something like that. Yeah, in that same vein, I like to talk about numbers a lot in this sort of vein, and so Bitcoin, like I said earlier, they gave up on the whole cash system, and what that means in terms of numbers is that Bitcoin can do about 1 million transactions per day, which on the surface might seem like a lot, but that means that if everybody on the planet wanted to do just one transaction, it would take almost 30 years. And I think it would take over 2 years, almost 3 years, if everyone holding Bitcoin wanted to make just one transaction, which is pretty shocking. And the cool thing about Lithium is if we're able to achieve something like 1,000 times more performance than that on consumer laptops, I mean, we could even have like a second network, perhaps, that like we do keep that small. But even a network that's running on just consumer laptops would maybe be able to let everyone on the planet do a transaction every day, right? If you're like well, maybe not quite that much, but if you're thinking 1,000 times faster than Bitcoin, that's 1 billion per day. Assuming there's 10 billion people on the planet, it's like, once every week or two, everybody could do one transaction, which is still pretty awesome. I think we can do a lot more than that. And that, we can get into more of the vision of how we think about Web3 and how we think about the impact that we can have, if people are interested in that. But yeah, I don't know, Alex, what do you think are the most? We have some questions that we fielded from the community in the past week.
Yeah, well, we just got another question that I want to bring in. That's a question I like from Josh Bergen. And he says that if he understands correctly, we're saying that the main reason that block sizes have been limited in the past is because it can compromise on decentralization. And that is what you're saying. Given the context,
yes,
the specifics of the consensus designs of those systems, that's me adding something. So then his question is, what is Lithium doing differently to make sure that decentralization is not compromised? No limits on the network.
Okay, so it's a little hard to hear. Alex, we lost it. Let me come back into the room. Maybe you can paste that over here, Josephine. But yeah, Lithium is different. I mean, that's one of the things we like to say. I'm getting an echo when I join the Zoom. That's why I was not here earlier. But yeah, what is Lithium doing different? Well, like I said, it's sort of a journey to get there. We like to sort of, okay, if I understand correctly, you were saying that the main reason in the past that they have limited the block size is because in theory it can compromise decentralization. Yes, that's right. What is Lithium doing differently to make sure that decentralization is not compromised when placing no limits on the network? Yeah, so before we can get to sort of, I mean, the answer to that, the complete answer to that is the white paper, which we will be publishing pretty soon. Honestly, the deep dive and the light paper have quite a lot of information too. So if you guys,
in short, though, the way I've been, because I've been asked this question a lot. I've been traveling to events, meeting a lot of new people that are interested in lithium, and I get this question amongst others. And
yeah,
if I had to answer in a few words, I would say that everything, all the essential functions of the blockchain are being incentivized inside of the consensus. That's the
right.
core differentiator.
But why is that critical? That's sort of
why is that critical?
Trick, right?
Right, because the functions that the compromise on decentralization in other systems comes from the fact that once you scale it, certain parts of the network go up in costs, and those costs are not being paid for. But if you incentivize everything within the consensus, then as you scale, certain parts of the network become more expensive. But since they're paid for, then you no longer have this disincentive to run certain elements which would be decentralization. Perhaps you want to elaborate on that further. But that's been my brief take. I've been practicing answering a lot of these questions, going to events a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty good, man. That's pretty good. Just to put a little bit of more detail on that, right? The functions that Alex is talking about. Well, first of all, I think you need to make it clear why it's important to pay for those functions, right? And so, one of the things we think about when we say true decentralization, which we consider to be the first principles of consensus design, is that you need to view the blockchain as a network application, right? And in its entirety, right? I think everybody understands there's sort of two pillars to the fundamentals, and everybody understands that you have to operate in game theory when you're designing a consensus, right? That it's very important to get the incentives right and to make the game into like some kind of a win-win situation for all the participants. But then they don't necessarily view the blockchain as an entirety, right? And the blockchain is a network application. And the easiest way to think about all the things that a blockchain needs to do is to just look at the RPCs. And so we talk a lot about the RPCs at Lithium, but that's a bit of a technical detail that maybe people don't know what that means, RPCs. It's a bit vague. Really what we're talking about is block production is incentivized on chains, right? So you get paid when you make a block, right? Making a block also means propagating it. So it's kind of funny to think because the real thing you want the chain to do is to get the block propagated to everybody and for those people to accept the block. And so what's really important is that if I'm a block producer and I make a block and Alex is also a miner, he wants to get the block from me. And of course, I want him to get my block. And so we have a win-win over that RPC actually. And most people think about like the hashing as being sort of the critical thing, but really it's the fact that I did the hash and Alex can verify that I did the hash, that's what incentivizes us to send the data over the wire, right? And when you think of a blockchain that way, you have a much more holistic viewpoint of it. And there's all these other functions besides sending the block from the miner who produced it to another miner that aren't incentivized, right? And so those are the things I was talking about earlier, right? It's getting the data to the wallet or to any other node, really. Another example we like to talk about is like if Alex is a miner and I'm a miner and I have someone else's block, I don't want to give it to Alex. Another critical one is transaction propagation, right? If a wallet sends me a transaction and I'm a miner, I don't want to give it to Alex. I'd rather keep it for myself so I can mine it myself. So that RPC is actually disincentivized. But all those things are critical to the function of the blockchain, right? And the problem is that in order for the blockchain to remain decentralized, volunteers need to provide those things, right? If volunteers don't provide them, then somebody has to get paid to provide them, and that's a centralizing force, right? And that's where you end up with things like Infura or RPC providers, and the onus becomes onto the dApp developers to provide the infrastructure, right? Like, how do you get your data on Uniswap? Well, uniswap.org runs, or uniswap.com, whatever it is, they run an Ethereum node and they provide the RPCs to the web3.js provider that gets you the data, right? And so that's a centralizing force, right? And maybe people don't want to hear that, but let me in from one of your other devices. But that's the critical that's the critical thing, right? You have to yeah, I'll get you, Alex. You have to pay for those RPCs. So I guess Alex is having a technical issue. We're gonna get Alex over here. You should be good to go, Alex. But yeah, those RPCs are not paid for typically, and so you want volunteers to do that. So that's what we call a full node on Bitcoin, right? The full node, the people who run full nodes are volunteers, and they're able to run a full node on a Raspberry Pi or like a $35 device that they can plug into their commodity internet connection. And then that provides all those critical functions. But if you were to make the blocks 10 or 100 or 1,000 times bigger, then that $35 device might become a $3,500 device or a $35,000 device. And then those volunteers wouldn't be willing to provide it. And you'd have to have something like the Solana Foundation sort of throwing money at those RPC providers in order to get them to keep providing that service, right? But who's going to do that? It's a centralizing force. Another way to sort of think about that issue, and another number we love to talk about, is the amount of capital infrastructure that's at play on Bitcoin and the sort of performance value you get out of that. So if you look at the total capital deployed for mining on Bitcoin, you end up seeing something like 10 to 100 billion dollars worth of capital, which is pretty incredible. But all that is doing mining, right? It's just finding these difficult hashes and not providing any other service for the blockchain. And if you're to take that amount of capital and deploy it into a cloud, you get a performance that's about 1 billion times higher than what Bitcoin gives you, right? So for $100 billion on Bitcoin, you get 7 transactions per second. For $100 billion on AWS, you'd get something in the ballpark roughly of 7 billion transactions per second, right? So 1 billion times more performant. Now, blockchains should be more expensive than traditional distributed systems, but they shouldn't be 1 billion times more expensive. They should be maybe 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 times more expensive, depending on like how decentralized you want them to be and how many nodes you want them to run on, right? If you're running them on if you're running something on 1,000 nodes, it should be 1,000 times more expensive or 1,000 times slower than the comparable distributed system in the Web 2 or traditional sense, right? So that difference between like the 10,000 and the billion is the opportunity, right? If you deploy capital in a Litheum context, you get all the security because you still have that capital underpinning it that's making it difficult to do the performance or do the work or do the difficulty. But you also get the performance along with it, right? Because what we kind of do is we take the difficulty and we unify it with the scalability, right? The performance of those functions is the thing that's difficult to do in order to make a block and get the reward, right? So it's kind of unifies everything. All right, we got another question here. I have a question. How you doing, Alex? What's going on? I guess he switched over to his laptop, but now we don't have a mic. I could, he's not on Zoom either. You ready to go live, Josephine? We've got Josephine in the background, sort of fielding people's questions. No, I won't make you come live. Maybe you guys will get to meet Josephine next time. How much more time? We've been going for almost an hour already, so it's kind of winding down. But yeah, I've got another question here from Josephine. So we've got how does 30 minutes? Okay. How does proof of performance incentivize work for runners? Explain the runners. So that's another kind of deep question. The runners essentially do two things, right? One is block production, and the other is getting data from the blockchain to the end users. The end users can be other runners actually, or wallets, right? But you have to, like, one of the things that blockchains really struggle with is getting data from the blockchain to the outside world in a way which is paid for by the consensus, right? So that's the role of the data runners. It's also kind of the role of the transaction runners a bit, but you can just think about the data runners for the moment. The data runners work in conjunction with the lucky hash function, which is another really cool thing we can talk about maybe later. But they're incentivized to feed data out, right? And then the transaction runners and the block runners essentially are just doing the block production portion of it, but they're also incentivized to give data outwardly to anyone who's going to be making a transaction or making what we call a mini block. To simplify that concept a little bit, you can think of it first, instead of thinking of it as two different nodes, you can think of just doing the block production and think about, like, if you wanted to make a block, whenever somebody wanted to send you a transaction, they could demand that you send them some data, right? So they could say, well, if you want me to make a block, or if you want me to make a transaction for you to have as a block producer, so you can take the reward, take the fee from that transaction, I want you to give me the latest block. So maybe we're at block 100. Give me that latest block and then sign it. And with that signature or that proof that you have that block, then I can include that proof in the transaction. When I give it to you, then it's a valid transaction, and you can use that to do work and get the work done. We use the fees as difficulty in proof of performance, and so that sort of empowers the wallets to demand service or performance from the chain. It's a very nice way of sort of unifying the reality that at the end of the day, the users are the ones who actually make a chain function by valuing its service and valuing its token, right? If the token doesn't have value, then you can't create incentives. And if you can't create incentives, then you can't create a blockchain. And so the ultimate power lies with the end users. And so we sort of formalize that empowerment and we say, well, since you're in charge here, you've got the fees and you're the ones that are willing to pay, you can demand that the blockchain do things for you. And that's sort of another way to think about how we define the difficulty in proof of performance. And then the reason we split apart block production into block runners and transaction runners is just for the sake of um, making the network topology a little more flexible, right? Because you don't want the ultimate block producer to have to talk directly to every single wallet in the world. You want to be able to have nodes at the edge of the network talk to all the wallets, consolidate those into what we call mini blocks, and then the mini blocks get sent to the block runner, who does the ultimate block production. But all the transaction runners participate in the rewards by producing the mini blocks that ultimately go into the blocks. So once upon a time, we called transaction runners mini block producers. So that's sort of their role, is like they get the transaction from the wallet and they produce mini blocks, and then the mini blocks go to the block producer who produces the block. The relationship between the block runner and the transaction runner is similar to the relationship between the transaction runner and the wallet, in that if you want to do work as a transaction runner or do work as a block runner, you need to get the fees that represent work from the downstream person. And in order for them to do that for you, they make you send them data, right? So a transaction runner basically forces a block runner to send them blocks. So another benefit of splitting that block production into two pieces is that we get the incentive to send a block even if the person isn't the block producer, right? If I have a block and I'm a block runner and I want to do work, I need to send that block to transaction runners in order to get them to send me mini blocks, right? So even though it's not my block that I produced, I now want to send it to someone at least. Another way to think about it is, if you just think about going back to a simpler model with Bitcoin, if I send my transaction to a miner, and then that miner sends it to a miner, and then that miner sends it to another miner, and then that miner finally makes a block out of it, in a sense, those miners in between the wallet and the block producer did some work with a lowercase w in order to get that block produced or to get that transaction into the block. And so we're trying to build an incentive around that behavior, right? We want transactions in blocks to be sent around the network. And so we split the two functions apart and build a bridge to get data flowing around the network in the block production cycle. So that's a very long answer there. But yeah, Alex says his audio is bugging, so I'm leaving and coming back in. So we did a dry run yesterday, but Alex is our head of partnerships, and he's also traveling around the world. So it's a bit tricky, to say the least. Oh, he's back here. All right, let me let him back in. How you doing, Alex? All right, nothing from Alex. When is the roadmap coming? Yeah, I figured we'd get that question. I actually meant to ask the marketing team for some more details on that. It's coming very soon. So if you go on the website, if there's any page that has a coming soon on it, that means that we pretty much finished that 90%, and we're just putting the finishing touches on it. So the roadmap is, I don't want to say a wrong date, but we can say it's August now. I think I can safely say Q3 at least. Don't hold me to this. It's in the next couple months. I could say one thing maybe more interesting that we're sort of committed to is what we're calling testnet phase 1. And so testnet phase 1, we're really like stepping on the gas on the engineering team to get this done. Testnet phase 1 is very much focused on dApp development. And so the biggest technical milestone that we have in all of our future, I think, is EVM integration. We're using our EVM and we're integrating that into the blockchain now. And in addition to that, we not only have to integrate the EVM into the consensus, but we also have to build the JSON RPCs so that Lithium can appear to be like another EVM compatible chain, and it can talk to MetaMask, it can talk to Hard Hat, it can use all the familiar tools that Solidity developers are used to. And so we have to actually handcraft all that stuff as well, because we're not forking Gath, we're not forking Reth. We actually have built our own blockchain in Rust from the ground up with our own consensus. And so we just have a raw EVM and then a bunch of Rust, and then we have to build JSON RPCs at the HTTP layer that look exactly like a normal fork of Geth or whatever. So that's taking a little bit of extra work. But I can tell you that we are actually starting to hook everything together. Sinhant and Tanveer have recently been trying to actually hook up MetaMask to Lithium Core. It doesn't work yet, but we're at the point where we're trying it, I think. So that's always good to see. And me and Prabhat have been mostly focused on the REVM integration and getting that working with what we call the forkable state manager, which is sort of a core piece of infrastructure in the consensus that deals with deciding what the longest chain is and switching from one fork to another, and validating blocks that don't happen to be on the longest chain. Doing all that stuff in an efficient way is fairly tricky. It's not the most complicated data structure I've ever seen, but it's not simple either. And so getting that to work with the EVM state management is pretty tricky. But we're making good progress. We're hoping to have a demo before Token 2049, but no promises. But that would be awesome if we do have a bit of a demo. And a demo doesn't mean a DApp; it just means maybe the possibility of a DApp. We'll see what that means exactly. But cool stuff coming soon. Is proof of performance better than POS or POW? In my view, yes, it's 100% better. It's one of the reasons we use the word big chain is because a big chain is everything a blockchain is, but so much more. It's important to restate. Hey, Alex, I think your audio is working. It's important to restate that we don't compromise in any way on decentralization, right? The whole industry is right now in this paradigm of the trilemma, right? And so it's you're decentralized or you scale. You have to do one or the other, right? But we believe we can do both without compromising. And so, yeah, in our view, it's better. I think actually proof of performance in the long run can actually be even more secure than other systems, because ultimately, this is a little bit of a deep concept, but people think about the hash and the stake as being what secures a blockchain, but really it's about capital, and it's the capital is used as collateral by the runners or by the miners or by the validators, and you have to punish them if they're working out of consensus, right? So with a proof of hash or proof of work system, you basically have a very clever way of punishing people with an opportunity cost, because if you're hashing on the wrong chain, then you're just wasting your electricity, which is very nice because the rest of the chain doesn't have to know that you're doing that, and you're punishing yourself in a sense. Proof of stake is a little more complicated because you actually have to know what the other chains are doing. You have to be able to slash them, right? And that's why we call it slashing, because you have to make sure that people aren't doing what they call exploiting the nothing at stake issue, which is to say you can easily you can make blocks on forks without getting punished if you were to design a proof of stake system in a naive way. But ultimately, you have to, because it's the collateral, you need a way to get people to deploy the collateral, right? And whether it's proof of stake or proof of work or proof of performance or whatever, the only reason that people deploy that collateral is because they're getting some return on their investment, right? We assume that everybody's greedy in this context and acting in their own best interest. And in order to get some reward to give to the miners or to give to the runners, you have to extract it from the end users, right? And that comes in two forms. It's either the fee that you pay for the transaction, or it's an inflation. And so you need ultimately to provide the most value to the end users so you can extract the most from them that they're happy to pay because they're getting a service in return for it. But the more you can extract from the users that they're happy to pay, then the more you can reward the runners. And so we actually think that by having a high value chain that can do more, you ultimately can get a much higher return, right? If you think about $100 billion, it sounds like a lot of money, but people pay $20 a month for their internet connection. And if you were to say have like one internet provider for the whole planet, you'd be getting $20 a month from around 10 billion people. Let's call it $10 from 10 billion people. That's $100 billion every month. That's $1 trillion a year, over $1 trillion a year. So you could probably justify having maybe $10 trillion worth of infrastructure to provide internet to the world. If people were willing to pay just $1 a month for their blockchain service, you should be able to justify a ton of infrastructure. Okay, much more than the $100 billion that Bitcoin is currently using. But you need to provide some service, right? You can't just make a million blocks every day and then say it's very secure. I mean, that's useful and it's awesome. And we love blockchain. I use blockchain every day. I use dApps every day. I'm part of the Web3 community. I'm holding a bunch of other tokens, but we do think that Lithium can just do so much more and really take this thing we call Web3 and really have it have the impact of the internet, right? Like Web3, I think, is a bit of a misnomer, because when I think web, I think this is something that everyone's using every day on the whole planet, right? You shouldn't call yourself web unless you're doing that. And I think that honestly, the path forward for the industry to get from where we are to that is very unclear, except with Lithium. True decentralization. So I'm getting another question. What does true decentralization mean? True decentralization is sort of a concept that encompasses what we think of as the first principles of consensus design, and that is to say, other chains require volunteers in order to remain decentralized, and in a sense, that's legit. And you could say it's decentralized. And in fact, one thing I like to talk about is FidoNet, which was something they were calling decentralized that existed before we ever had blockchains that they called decentralized. Alex is coming back. Sorry, a little distracted. But yeah, true decentralization means that we have a chain which doesn't require any volunteers. Or another way to think about it is we have a consensus that pays for every single function that a blockchain requires to work. And so it's we used to also call it full decentralization. People started using the phrase full decentralization to mean something else, which was like when they decentralized the sequencer in their layer 2 or whatever. They're like, oh, we're fully decentralized. That's not what we think of when we think of true decentralization. We think of true decentralization meaning every piece of hardware and every piece of collateral that's deployed in service of the chain gives you some return, right? There's no full nodes. There's no RPC nodes. There's only people doing proof of performance as transaction runners, data runners, or block runners. And they're all getting paid for every single thing they lay out, even including work like systems administration, right? If you have a good sysadmin knowledge and you know how to like deploy a good firewall, then you might be a great transaction runner, because you're going to have to talk to the whole internet in order to get transactions from wallets. And that's the reason why we think of Lithium as being one of the only like DOS protected chains, right? Because we actually just pay for it's very much less top down. Like we don't say like, oh, in order to run a sequencer, you need to have like 100 cores and like 10 terabytes of RAM, right? We don't say that. We just say, if you can perform services on behalf of the wallet, then you get paid. And it's up to you to figure out what the most efficient way of doing that is, right? If you can do it with less hardware and more systems administration, or you can co-locate your server in the right place in the world, like maybe sticking it near in Northern California, or sticking it in Hong Kong, or wherever these pipelines are running around the world, like that might give you some advantage, right? And that's the sort of thing you want to incentivize people to do if you're trying to build a internet scale application, right? Like, where do AWS and Google put their clouds?
Yeah, can you think of it in the same way that with Bitcoin mining, you had at some point a big amount of the mining network was in Sichuan province because there's a lot of hydro. Also in Iceland because there's a lot of geothermal energy and it's quite cold. So you want to find the most efficient systems in terms of cooling. How much is your electricity cost? And that comes into our next question, which is about people working for the stake, from our community member Jerry Sam, who's asking about the trade-offs, particularly in terms of transaction speed and energy use compared to other systems like proof of stake or proof of work.
Yeah. Well, just to finish what you were bringing up there around Chengdu in Iceland, right? It's like you get the thing that you incentivize, right? And so if you incentivize people to do hashing, then they go to the best place to do hashing. One of my favorite stories about Chengdu is we heard, a friend of a friend had actually built a power plant in the mountains of Chengdu and was doing, had deployed like millions of dollars of infrastructure hidden somewhere in the mountains in Chengdu. And they were communicating with the Bitcoin network over a 5G cell phone connection, right? So that was always a funny example to me, because, you have like all this infrastructure that's being deployed, but it's just running over a cell phone connection because there's no incentive to run a wire into the mountain in Chengdu, right? And so that's sort of part of another way to think about the problem. As far as the trade-offs in terms of transaction speed and energy use, right? Um,
I think I'll just throw in there that for the amount of energy being deployed, we're trying to incentivize the maximum amount of transactions. So as opposed to, for example,
right.
Bitcoin, where there's a non-alignment where it's not directly proportional the amount of energy that's being used in the network for mining and the amount of transactions. So regardless of how much mining is happening, you could double the amount of mining or have it, and you'd stay at 1 megabyte blocks, so 7 transactions per second. So there's a disalignment there, whereas ours is directly proportional.
Right. Yeah, as far as energy use, like blockchains need something that's difficult, right? You need a difficult thing in order to produce the consensus. In the case of Bitcoin, they actually just burn energy and it really serves no other purpose than being difficult. And in our view, we sort of view that as wasteful difficulty, right? Because it's only difficult for the sake of being difficult, but doesn't provide any other service. If you think about the things that we're using as our difficulty, they actually are difficult with a lowercase d to provide, right? Like if I'm going to take data from the blockchain and give it to wallets as like a service, I have to like have a server, I have to plug it in, I have to have an internet connection. All that stuff costs money. And so we're just using that thing as the difficulty, right? So we sort of align the performance with the energy use, right? It just does everything that you want a blockchain to do as an end user and nothing more, right? And that's sort of the double meaning of the word performance there too, right? It's performance in the sense that it's computer performance, like you're getting people to deploy CPUs and memory and bandwidth, and that all performs, like a high performance distributed infrastructure or whatever. But it's also performance in the sense of like a contract is performed on, right? It's like the blockchain is performing a service for the end users, right? And those two things are aligned. What's the
Awesome. If there's any follow-up questions from Jerry on that, I saw manually put in the Discord server into the group chat, so we encourage you guys to join there. And fortunately, we get to talk to you guys in this format and answer questions. But if you have questions at any other point, then you're encouraged to ask them in Discord. And we have a team that's making an effort to answer them as promptly as possible.
Yeah, another important thing to think to mention is like we're probably, I think, one of the most open and generous projects, I think, as far as like trying to get people to understand really what we're doing. I think a lot of other projects, this whole concept of a white paper ends up being more of a marketing gimmick than something where they're sincerely trying to explain to you how things work. And we're going to have a lot more events like this and a lot more documentation coming out where we really think that we can get everyone to understand what we're doing and what makes Litheum special, and really what, more importantly, what makes Litheum secure, right? I think people are willing to use Bitcoin because they can read the white paper, it makes some sort of sense to them, and they're willing to like put their money and store it there. If like you're asking people to take their money and put it into a system, like if somebody like was running a bank out of their kitchen, you wouldn't feel very secure doing that, right? You need to sort of feel that, I think, you understand what's going on. And we have a very fundamental understanding, I think, of how blockchains work. And we really want to explain it to people because we think that ultimately that's in our own best interest, right? Like if people understand how Litheum works, and then they can trust it, and then they're going to be willing to use it more and more and more. And so education is a big part of our efforts here. And we're very, very open. So please, like, just jump in our Discord, jump in our Telegram. Like if you ask a question, we will do our best to answer it, especially in these early days when, you guys, our early community is just, we're very thankful to have you. You guys are so important to this mission. Like we're really trying to change the world, and we need all the support we can get. We need people that understand what we're doing and can explain it, help explain it to people, and help test it out, help use it, and just get the message out there. So yeah, if you're curious to know more, just please send your questions in. We're cataloging all of them. We're building an FAQ. We're going to be doing more AMAs like this in the future. So just yeah, let us know. We're very happy to whenever we get some engagement and questions from people.
Yeah, looping back to, or bringing something you just said now with something you said before, about the theoretical proof and the practical proof. Practical proof is something
Yeah.
I think I'm looking forward to very much. I think everybody in the community is looking forward to very much. I think it's understood. You mentioned people can read the Bitcoin white paper and understand it in some ways. I would imagine that an increasing number of people using Bitcoin haven't read the white paper, but they know it's been around for such a long time. They know people around them that they trust who maybe have read
Right.
it or have used it. And so you have that kind of practical proof, which we're looking forward to building over time. We got another question in from.
Let me walk that back too. It's not just about the white paper, right? It's about the whole community that's there helping to explain to people like why it's secure, right? And because most people can't just read the white paper and say, oh, there's like this hashing and blah 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 and these digital signatures. But you know, people, I think there's been enough of a community and enough of a sort of a building up of sort of the knowledge, that the community knowledge around how it works, that people begin to trust it more and more and more. And yeah, you know, of course, some people will just wait until, you know, 80% of the world is using it and then they're going to jump on. But you know, we should at least be able to get those excited people who are interested in cutting edge technology and who are willing to take a small risk. You know, they should be able to approach the project and say, I want to learn more, and they should be able to figure it out. And that's a big goal for us. And we think we have a big advantage in that regard, because we do think that Lithium is actually fairly simple compared to a lot of other things that are going on out there. It's definitely more complicated than Bitcoin, but it's also way simpler than a lot of the other, like sharding and DAG and, you know, whatever other things. I don't want to throw too many stones, but Lithium is sort of more like a traditional blockchain, right? It's we're making blocks. There's one chain. There's one state that is moved around by the blocks, and everybody's just trying to synchronize that one state. And so it's fairly simple. We also think we have like a fairly good understanding about blockchain that we can explain in a very non-technical way, because in our view, really, it is all about the game theory, and people can understand the rules of a game, right? If we sit down with like a Monopoly board and somebody's never played Monopoly, right? They don't feel like they have to be a computer scientist to understand how Monopoly works. And actually, I don't think you have to be a computer scientist to understand how blockchains work either. You don't have to be a computer scientist to understand how like corporate governance works, because you understand that all the equity holders are aligned and all the people who are bond holders have a certain incentive, and then everybody kind of works together to have a win-win situation to make the company grow, right? And that's sort of similar way that you can think about blockchains, right? Like the miners all want to work in their own best interest to produce the consensus and produce service for the users, and the users want to use the blockchain because they're getting some service from it. And so you can actually just strip out all the techno mumbo jumbo and just think of a blockchain in those terms. And I think it's much more comprehensible to people. And we've been working on some presentations in that vein that'll kind of get people from zero to blockchain. And then once they're at that point, they can get from blockchain to Lithium. So it's a whole sort of comprehensive way that we're thinking about bringing people not only within the industry, but even from outside the industry onto the Lithium train, so to speak.
Yeah, we got another question from Jerry Sam saying, or asking, considering Lithium's focus on performance, how do you plan to attract users and developers to choose your blockchain over others like Ethereum? So Ethereum, and the thing with Bitcoin is that it's pretty much been established that it's staying at 1 megabyte blocks every 10 minutes. So 7 transactions per second, or around 850,000 transactions per day. And that's going to take decades for everyone to be able to use it. Essentially, as adoption grows, you have the market mechanism for bidding for block space, and the price of a transaction, and US dollars goes up, and Satoshis and US dollars goes up. So in Satoshis, and then whatever the price of Bitcoin, if the price of Bitcoin continues to go up, then that just keeps growing. So at some point, Bitcoin really becomes, it's gone from this payment system back in Clay's time that he's been referring to this to this kind of storage of wealth. Maybe you can pass it on to the next generation type of blockchain. Then you have L2s and stuff like that. But Ethereum, similar throughput, also a little under 1 million transactions per day. And then you've got scaling solutions and complicated ones that most people don't understand. So I think one of our big value propositions is the simplicity around the scaling solution that we offer, and then the combination of decentralization and scalability. So Ethereum, Bitcoin aren't offering the throughput required for a lot of the dApps or the vision of the future vision of the industry that I have.
Yeah.
And then there's a few others. You want to add something to that, Clay?
Yeah, this is another. I mean, I can get kind of ranty, and I am sorry for that. But yeah, there's a bunch of different aspects to this question where I think Litheum has advantages. But the simplest way to say it is that I think a lot of dApp developers really struggle to build their visions onto blockchains, right? Because you're constantly thinking about gas, and a lot of the end users, I think they perceive the same problem, but in a different way. And so I've talked to a lot of people recently who actually were in the industry, and they're even leaving the industry because they're saying like they're not seeing the user impact, they're not seeing the blockchain grow into the mainstream. They're seeing like terrible user experience failures. And I think that actually all of this stems from the same problem, which is that you're just trying to save gas all the time, and it affects everything. Literally everything in the blockchain world, I think, is affected by this problem. And so one of the biggest things that we think we can help people do is build stuff that is way more usable and way more just visionary than what was previously possible. Because the other thing is, we think we can give dApp developers sort of a permanent home, right? It's like, I know how engineers think, and ultimately, whenever you're building like an application, you're sort of depending on all these systems that are underneath you to work, right? Whether it's a web application or a mobile application or whatever, right? I need to know that Apple iOS is going to function before I build an app on an Apple Store, right? I need to know that the Apple Store is going to be there and be able to get me paid. So I'm depending on all this infrastructure that's below me. And when you're an application developer, you look with a very critical eye at those things, right? Like you're not going to build on maybe the Windows Phone because, maybe you don't think that that's a good ecosystem to be in. And so we think we can really deliver a platform for dApp developers that is like absolutely head and shoulders above everything else that's going on in the world, because you have a sort of guaranteed place in our garden, right? It's like in Ethereum, you have, if you go and look on ultrasound.money, you'll see that really there's only a handful of dApps that are able to even work on Ethereum because everything else is priced out. So you have Uniswap, Aave, you have Tether, you have Ether transfers, and then you have like contract deployments and a bunch of other routers, which are just another or more decentralized exchanges, right? And so it's very, very limited. And so I think what Litheum can deliver as far as a platform advantage is that, like, if you have something that will benefit from being decentralized, if it's delivering some kind of value to the end user, you should always be able to have a place on Litheum, right? We're driving the price point down to like where it should be. And it's like compute is really cheap. Like if you spend $100 on compute, you can get a CPU that has like 8 cores that are doing 2 billion things per second, right? And so we're going to be able to do quite a lot that other chains just aren't able to do. We think we're going to be able to revolutionize SocialFi, GameFi, DeFi, even, because we think we can build much better experiences even in DeFi. It's going to open up a lot of possibilities. Long story short.
Long story short.
Yeah, sorry, I get very excited talking about Litheum, so I tend to go on a bit.
The excitement is contagious. I'm excited too. I hope people listening to this are excited. If you guys have any, final questions or final things you want to address, please put them in the chat.
I want to kick it to you more, Alex, honestly, but I think we'll have to wait till next time because your mic is just really quite bad. You might want to
I'm
just turn
sorry
your
about
camera
that.
off and like stick your camera in your face or something, or stick your mic in your face. But yeah, we'll hear from Alex more next time. And actually, I'm hoping maybe some of our other team members will be able to jump in the future, and you can get some more perspectives that are a little less techy and a little less detail oriented than me, because I've been, I'm an engineer, and I've been, you know, nose to the grindstone with this thing for 3 years. So it's a little bit hard to get a sort of a wide angle perspective on it sometimes. So it's always helpful to have people who are a little less close to it to sort of keep things in focus.
Yeah, I totally agree. Hopefully, you guys can get better. I'm gonna get a better setup. This was our very first one, so
Yeah.
we have some bumps in the road. You can expect improvements from us from all fronts, whether it's on AMA, how engaged we are with our community. So we've been building, we've existed for a long time, and we've been thinking about this problem and this solution for a long time, as you guys can tell from the way we've approached this discussion. What's more recent for us is what we're doing right now, which is really interacting directly with our community. We launched our website 10 days ago. Clay, I don't know if you brought that up in the discussion, but
Yeah.
things
No, it's
things
super
are
early. We've been
yeah,
bootstrapping for a long time, and we barely had anyone in our Twitter or Telegram even a month or two ago. So anybody who's here, you're super early to this rocket ship, and we're really thankful to have you. And yeah, it's gonna be a journey.
for sure. So the ways to stay up to date: our Discord, our website, our Twitter. Those are the places I would go. You can go follow Clay specifically on Twitter, also at ClayRab. He's got some of the most insightful blockchain content with very little following so far. I would expect that to change now that Litheum is basically going live. Verify says LFG. Let's fucking go. We got 2 questions brought up to us. One is about the core mission of Litheum Lab, how we see it evolving over the next few years, and how we're going to bridge the gap between technology and community to fulfill its vision, its mission. So maybe we can touch on that briefly in the next few minutes as we're wrapping up. So we mentioned already, community is key, community is core. We're building a network application, and then on top of that comes all the dApps, and on top of that comes all the users. So we understand that we're building core infrastructure, and then we want it to have a whole life of its own. And we're quite creative and thinking a lot about what can be built on top of it. But for us, it's even we're excited to see what people build that we haven't even thought of. That's at least how I'm thinking about it. I wouldn't want it to stay restricted to only the things that we've come up with. But yeah, community is key, and the core mission of Litheum Labs is to deliver decentralized tech at scale. That's how I would frame it.
Yeah.
Clay, you wanna add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we want to deliver decentralized tech to every corner of the world. We want people, frankly, a lot of people are priced out, and the people who most need decentralized tech are the most priced out. And so we see this as a big failure, and we think that Litheum can get to every corner of the world and deliver the security, the privacy, and the robustness of decentralized technology to everyone on the planet. And we think that we can expand the horizon of what people consider Web3 to be, to include a lot more stuff that is used by people every day, a lot more practical, and not just totally focused on trading and sort of the purely financial. I mean, everything in a blockchain is sort of financial in a sense, but I think DeFi has sort of overshadowed everything because it is such cool tech. I mean, DeFi is awesome. Don't misunderstand me there. I love DeFi. We use it every day here. But yeah, there's a lot more that can be done. I don't. I always talk about CryptoKitties, and the team kind of, I don't know what they think about that, but CryptoKitties is a very interesting example because it went viral in 2016. It maybe could have gotten huge numbers of people into blockchain, but it took over. It was the first time the blocks became completely full on Ethereum, and it doesn't make sense to trade $1 or $5 kitties for $100 transaction fees, and so it sort of killed itself. And it's those sort of things that we think are lurking in the backs of people's minds that maybe they really dreamt to build when they first started thinking about becoming a Solidity developer and building blockchain tech, but that they realized once they got into it, they had to compromise in some way. They had to just give up on that dream, or they had to build it in a way where it wasn't really decentralized. And we think we can make a lot of that stuff work. Bridging the gap between technology and community. Yeah, I mean that's something we think we can really shine on, actually. I mean, ultimately it's up to the application developers to get that done. We are going to build some in-house dApps as well, but really we think about Lithium as being a platform, and if we do our job right, then we empower the dApp developers to bridge that gap. The other way, which I already mentioned, we want to bridge that gap is through our educational efforts. What do you think is like the bigger vision of Lithium, Alex?
For myself, I said decentralized tech at scale. I would say enabling sovereign ownership of data. I think that's
Say that
key,
again?
and that's sovereign ownership of data. So people to be able to, like when we mentioned SocialFi, for example, my vision is that you have these applications, and as opposed to what we're currently using today, in which when I log into my account, I'm basically requesting access to my data, which is owned and stored somewhere by a centralized entity.
Mm-hmm.
And so to actually own my own accounts, to own my data, my data, and to have that stored across. The reason we use a lot of these companies is because they set up all of this complicated technical infrastructure, and they build these awesome apps. If we can have awesome apps built on technical infrastructure, that I can be the owner of my accounts, which for me is the foundation of DeFi, and can be the foundation of so much more online once we hit a certain scalability threshold. So sovereign ownership of data for me is a core central theme of the vision, enabling that. Some people call it financial freedom. That's another term that's used often. So for me, decentralized tech, sovereign ownership of data, those are the two main positives.
Right. Yeah. It's getting rid of the walled gardens of Web 2. It's also, I think, like a financial solution for the internet era, right? We've been sort of missing that, right? Like the world is very connected with the information systems, but you still have these big gateways in the way when you're getting into finance, right? It's very hard to do remittances. It's hard to buy things from overseas. And I think that that's a really important way that we can connect the world, right? Like humans are, in some sense, economic creatures, and we form a lot of our relationships around our economic relationships. And so I think it brings the world a lot closer if we can engage with each other economically without some bank, frankly, getting in the way, right? And so that's going to be a big win, I think.
100%. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice place to wrap up. Again, want to reiterate that we're super grateful to have you guys on this journey with us. It's very early, so we're looking forward to continuing to build with you, to interact with all of you, to share with you, and to learn from you as well. We got one more question that just came in, so maybe we can touch on that real quick. Clay, how do you envision the evolution of blockchain technology in everyday life, and what role will Lithium play in this future? So, how important is blockchain? Maybe why you touched a little bit on why would you make your life mission at the moment to build a blockchain? Why is blockchain specifically so important? We just talked a little bit about the mission, the sovereign ownership, the connecting the world. I guess the internet already connects the world, but on certain specific terms, by certain specific people, and we want to open that up.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately blockchain should provide every sort of financial function that we have, really. It's just a better technology, I think, than the traditional systems in that regard. I think anything which is like a publicly attested statement of ownership or status or identity that we currently exist, like title, things like of that sort, I think will be definitely taken over by blockchain technology. I also think markets. I've talked to a lot of folks on Wall Street, and they frankly view the DeFi space as a joke. And I think it is possible for blockchain and decentralized tech to affect that world, but it's a long way off. And Litheum definitely has the vision of being a part of that as well. It's going to be a long journey, right? And it's more than, I think we have the best tech, but it's more than just tech. It's about regulations. It's about law. It's about acceptance. It's about mainstream acceptance.
About governance also.
Right, exactly. We have to set up the governance properly. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges before we can say that it's everyday technology or part of the mainstream. But we definitely think that we have the foundation to get there. And this is going to be the journey, as getting from this early stage to some place where we can say it does have impact on everyday life.
Awesome. I want to thank everybody for joining. Thank you for the questions, Jerry Sound, Verify.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. It's been really great. Really great questions, honestly. Here's Greg's over here in the Twitter chat. Some good questions and great answers. Very excited for future with Big Chain. Yes. So Greg is another great recent addition to our team who maybe will be ending up on stream soon. He's based out of South Africa, and he's been doing a lot of the work with Alex. He and Alex have been working together to do some really awesome stuff for us on the community building, partnerships, marketing, strategy, all sorts of things. And so I'm really thankful to have you, Greg, and hoping we can do great things together.
Yep. Thank you, Clay, for this investment you're making into what hopefully becomes a core piece of everything we talked about, whether it's financial applications, bring down walled gardens, new government systems, the future of the internet, essentially. We're building this together.
Thank you too, man. All of our team is our little partners, and I'm really thankful to have everybody, and it's really starting to come together. I kind of finally feel like we have all the pieces in place, and we've been bootstrapping for too long, and I think I was missing some big pieces, and we're really I think finally kind of getting it all together, and I'm doing a lot more coding recently, which is awesome, with Alex and Greg's support, also our chief of staff Josephine, and all the rest of the team as well. Really thankful to have you guys, and so excited to be here for our first AMA, and looking forward to more.
Yep, likewise.
All right.
Judy says thank you. Jerry says thank you, and we say thank you,
Judy. Thank you, Jerry. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.